What a great pleasure to be here today as the honorary consul for Brazil for the state of Utah for the past 6 years. I've had an opportunity to associate with literally hundreds and maybe thousands of Brazilians. And it's always been a great pleasure for me to do this. In fact, when Ambassador Rubens Barbosa, one of Ambassador Patriota's predecessors, asked me to do this job, I asked him what the job description was. And he said, well, it's easy. No money, no reimbursement, lots of problems, and all you're going to get from us is a Brazilian flag and a coat of arms. And I said, well, I'll take that. I'll take that challenge. Now he said, why would you do something like that? And I said, well, I guess it's because I love the Brazilians. And he said, that's good enough for me. So today, that makes it a special opportunity for me to introduce today one extraordinary person, a man by the name of Antonio Aguiar Patriota. Now, everybody knows how to say Patriota. He was appointed ambassador to the United States February 3rd, 2007. And I like to think that he was born to be an ambassador, because not only did I see that in his impressive resume, but Patriota, for those that speak Portuguese, means patriot. And I don't think that there could have been a more appropriate name for an ambassador to the United States than the Patriot. And so that's the kind of person that he is. He is a patriot, and he's an amazing man. As I looked over his amazing and impressive resume, I see that his previous position, and I'm going to kind of shortcut this because it is as long as my arm, but his previous position was the Undersecretary of Political Affairs for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brasilia. He was also the Chief of Staff of the and Secretary for the Diplomatic Relations to the Minister of Foreign Relations. He was Minister. He was also the Deputy Diplomatic Advisor to the President of the Republic. At one point, he served as the Minister Counselor to Brazil's permanent diplomatic mission to the organization to the international organizations in Geneva, and additionally, he was the permanent deputy representative of the World Trade Association, and also to the United Nations. He served as a diplomat in Venezuela and in China. And he has a diploma in philosophy from the University of Geneva, and also a degree from Brazil's Diplomatic Academy, Rio Branco Academy in Brazil, from the Rio Branco Institute. He's an amazing person. He's married to Tanya Cooper, Patriota. They have 2 sons. And so it's been a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to pass a few hours with Ambassador Patriota today. He is now well imbued with the state of Utah and all of us, the Mormons, the mountains, the opportunities for skiing, which I think he will take advantage of in the near future. We'd hoped to do it this time, but it didn't work. He had too tight of a schedule. But on top of that, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce an extraordinary man representing an extraordinary country and an extraordinary people. So that's my pleasure. And so, Ambassador Patriota.
Well, that was certainly an extraordinary introduction, so thank you very much, Gary Neeleman, who yourself, I think, should be described. You're the one who should be described as extraordinary for all the work that you and your wife and your family, your children, have done to bring closer the people of Utah, people of the United States, and the people of Brazil. So we're very proud to have you here as our honorary consul. I'm very happy that you accepted the proposal made by my predecessor, Rubens Barbosa, even though the conditions were not as attractive as you might have expected. Let me just start by saying that it's been a very rewarding experience for me to be ambassador here in the United States in Washington for the past 2 years, because we are experiencing a moment of great possibility, opportunity in the relationship between our two countries, the two largest democracies in the Americas, two countries that have many traits in common, also many differences, as maybe I'll mention a little later. But to start off, roughly the same landmass. In fact, Brazil a little bit larger than the U.S. if you don't count Alaska. The U.S. population is slightly larger at 300 million. We have 200 million people, roughly speaking, but very diverse population, very multi-ethnic, multi-religious. And today, we are very proud to say in Brazil, very democratic. In fact, democracy has worked so well in Brazil that we've managed to elect a president from the working class, and this in a country that is famous for its very high degree of social inequality, but an inequality that we have been successful in the past few years in particular to reduce. And this has been one of the trademarks of the current administration, one that has proven successful not only from a social, and I would say even a moral perspective, in bringing millions of Brazilians out of extreme poverty and at least 20 million into the middle class, but also very wise and very intelligent from the point of view of economic prosperity and growth. As we face today an economic crisis that touches the entire world, the fact that the Brazilian domestic market has expanded has been indeed of great benefit to our society and to our economy. Perhaps I'll start by talking a little bit about the Brazilian economy and then look at the political situation and follow that with some thoughts about our foreign policy, a foreign policy that is going through a moment of great creativity and innovation. And then maybe we can have some dialogue and questions and answers so that we can interact a little. Economically, those of you who have followed Brazil for some time, but perhaps most here are even too young to remember, so I'll remind them that in the not-too-distant past, we used to be known for hyperinflation and for a severe debt situation. We would go from one debt crisis to another in the 70s and the 80s in particular, and even somewhat in the early 90s. We were still grappling with structural macroeconomic problems. So it is truly rewarding for Brazil as a society and a country and an economy today to have overcome those problems, to have inflation under control, and this is something that was accomplished in the president prior to President Lula, President Cardoso, in the late 90s, to the point where if you look at the BRICS countries, the BRICS being Brazil, Russia, India, China, a category that Goldman Sachs invented actually, but that is sometimes useful for comparative terms. Brazil has the lowest inflation of the BRICS, single digit, around 4.6%. If you look at the debt situation, well, not only have we overcome that situation, but we've become a minor creditor nation today with more than $200 billion in foreign exchange reserves, which also acts as a quite useful cushion now in times of liquidity shortage internationally. Those two developments are really fundamental to understand the comparatively better, improved economic outlook that we have for Brazil, especially in the last, let's say, 10 years or so. This has also come about with a greater exposure to international trade. Brazil went from a country that used to export around $60 million in 2002, 2003, to a country that exported almost $200 billion last year. So that is quite a considerable growth. In fact, I hear that it's probably the biggest growth in exports percentage-wise for any non-oil exporting country in this same period. And curiously, even though there has been such a big expansion in our exports, trade for us, international trade, is still a relatively small percentage of GDP at around 14%. That is the lowest percentage for any of the BRICS, again, if you look at Russia, India, China as comparisons. And again, whereas that used to be seen as perhaps a structural problem a few years back, now in times of a very sharp downfall in international trade, and the WTO Director General was foreseeing a 9% decrease in international trade this year. Well, it turns out to be an advantage to be less exposed to foreign markets and less reliant on any single market in particular. You have very close to the United States 2 countries, Canada and Mexico, that are extremely dependent on the U.S. market. Mexico for up to or beyond 80% of its exports. In the case of Brazil, the United States represents around 16% of our exports. And this has not prevented our trade from growing very significantly and from reaching very robust figures. In fact, last year, two-way trade was $53 billion, and Brazil became increasingly attractive, is becoming an increasingly attractive market for the United States. In fact, it was the fastest growing market for U.S. exports in Latin America, with the exception of Chile, with which the United States has a free trade agreement. The U.S. does not have a free trade agreement with Brazil, so that does show a high degree of dynamism in the relations between the two economies. But again, I was mentioning the fact that we are not exceedingly reliant on one exclusive market, and this is in part due to, well, our historical evolution, but also a little bit in part due to Brazilian diplomacy and the effort that we have made, in particular in the past few years, to diversify our partners. So without neglecting the importance of developed country traditional partners such as the United States, the European Union, Japan, we have invested very aggressively in expanding and enhancing our trade ties with our neighbors, first of all, through Mercosur and other South American countries, but in Africa and the Middle East and the Far East and other parts of the world. One of the most interesting features of the recent Brazilian economic development, and one that attracts a lot of attention here in the United States, is the fact that Brazil in the past 3 or 4 years has become energy self-sufficient. Now, that was an important topic during the electoral campaign last year. I recall the candidates talking about the importance of greater energy independence for the United States. The United States, of course, being heavily reliant on oil imports in particular. Well, this came about in Brazil through a two-pronged effort. One of them is the development of the biofuels industry, and this is something that goes back to the 70s. The 70s, when there were these oil price hikes that caught many economies unawares, and at the time Brazil had a still relatively minor oil extraction industry. So it weighed very heavily on our economy, and we started looking at alternatives. And one alternative that proved very attractive for a country with a large landmass and that can grow tropical products very easily was the ethanol option, the option of producing ethanol from sugarcane. But I think it would have been, most people in the 70s would never have imagined the extent to which we would have developed this industry, to the point where today in Brazil, gasoline is the alternative fuel, and ethanol is the main principal fuel for our vehicles. And Brazil is the 7th largest automobile producer around the world, and all would be an exaggeration, but more than 90% of the cars and automobiles produced in Brazil today are of a brand that we call flex fuel, hybrids, I think you call them here, meaning that they can run either completely on gasoline or on ethanol. Another interesting feature is that the network for distributing fuel in Brazil gives the drivers the option of choosing either gasoline or ethanol at practically any pump. Again, something that you don't see in the United States, although the United States, along with Brazil, is one of the two largest ethanol producers in the world. So this was a very successful strategy. But along with that, Petrobras, which is our national oil company, used to be a state oil company, but in the past 10 years it became a private-public initiative and was open to private capital, to the point where the state only holds a 40% proportion of its assets, started and invested heavily in the deep-sea drilling off Brazil's coast. And this proved to be also a successful effort at very deep levels along the coast side of southeastern Brazil. Large deposits of oil were found. The exact extent of those deposits is still a matter of some mystery. I think that Brazilian authorities and the specialists are trying to withhold information on what would be still speculative at this point. But the indications are that indeed it is the biggest oil find since the oil finds in Kazakhstan some 10 years ago. And there's no question that that has allowed Brazil to become self-sufficient on one hand, meaning no need to import oil anymore from other sources. But in addition to that, within 5, 10, 20 years, we could become a very significant oil exporter. So if you put all those things together, and in addition to that, the social policies that I referred to briefly in my introduction, that it brought millions of Brazilians into the mainstream of the economy, you will find a general picture for the Brazilian economy that has been as favorable as, well, since I became a Brazilian diplomat 30 years ago. And this has opened up new possibilities for development and new possibilities also for interacting with the outside world, which I will mention in a moment. But let me also highlight the importance of the return of democracy to Brazil. Now, differently from the United States, Brazil has had a very diverse, high degree of experimentation with political systems. We were a monarchy for most of the 19th century, and actually very badly seen for most of our neighbors. We were considered a bastion of European royalist conservatism, whereas we were surrounded by republics all around the Spanish-speaking Americas and North America. And although Brazilian historians today say that that had some benefit because it helped to keep a large territory together to provide for a strong national identity, whereas the Spanish-speaking Latin American countries fragmented into many different units. The truth is that we are still struggling to overcome some of the legacies, part of the negative heritage also of that time, which was a very centralized government, a very authoritarian type of ruling, not authoritarian necessarily in a repressive way, but in a way that created arbitrary decisions and not enough interaction with the provinces and the vast territory. Like the United States, we were a slave nation, and we were not proud at all to have been the last country in the world to have abolished slavery. Although, differently from the United States, once we did abolish slavery in 1888, there were never laws in Brazil that reinstated institutionalized discrimination against African Brazilians, whereas in the United States, of course, it took you until at least 1965 for African Americans to enjoy the same rights as other Americans. And of course, it is of great symbolic value that you should have elected last year the first U.S. president of African origin. In his case, it's true African origin because his father was born in Kenya, of course. And this has been a great inspiration for all of us across the world, I believe, and an extraordinary story in its own right. But in particular in Brazil, where race relations have also been a specific struggle. In a different way from the United States, there was never any segregation in the way that it existed in the U.S., but in more recent times, it became clear that the people of darker skin earned lower wages and had lower levels of education and often were struggling under more difficult conditions than the rest of the population. So here again, a point in common and a difference. But I was talking about our political evolution, the fact that we were a monarchy for most of the 19th century, then we became a republic, and then we had some flirtation with national socialist types of government, nothing that even remotely resembled German Nazi regimes or fascism in Italy, but that had an authoritarian streak to it, although also very modernizing in other senses, bringing legislation that protected the working classes, for example. Subsequent to that, during the Cold War, there was a military coup. Brazil, as many others in the Americas, became part of a struggle, an ideological struggle between communism and capitalist ideas of how to organize the economy and society. There were tensions in all the Americas that led to right-wing conspiracies that ultimately took power. And in this case, we had a long period of military rule from 1964 until 1990. In 1990, the first democratically elected president completed the transition back to democracy. And for us, I think in Brazil, just as important as having an African American at the White House has been to have a worker as Brazilian president, a worker who tried, leader of the Workers' Party, a union leader, and who tried 4 times to reach the highest office in Brazil. And if it were not for democracy and the fact that democracy allows for the majority of the population to express its opinion under a condition of freedom of expression, of ideas, he probably would not have made it. And I think this has proven extremely healthy for the country, for our political system, for our economy, and for our society. Even the most enthusiastic supporters of President Lula would probably not have imagined that he would have been as successful as he has been, really across the spectrum, whether it's internal politics, economics, or foreign policy. This is not to say that we do not still have many challenges to overcome. We still have inordinately high rates of urban violence in our 2 largest cities, Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. Curiously enough, in some of the poorer areas of the country, there is less urban violence, which leads one to the conclusion that very often urban violence is the product of extreme inequality coexisting side by side, as it does in Rio and São Paulo. There are struggles on the educational front. There are struggles on the environmental front that we must overcome. But again, I think we're making very consistent progress, whether it's in reducing deforestation in the Amazon, and we have also other success stories to present. I mentioned the biofuels, but also if one compares with the other BRICS countries, the cleanest energy matrix of any country of its size around the world, with more than 40% of our energy coming from renewable sources, a combination of hydroelectricity, biofuels, and other sources. As we look to the elections in 2010, we are optimistic that this perfectioning of democracy will continue, and that some of the policies that are currently in place, especially on the social front, will also be pursued. Let me just conclude with a few words on our foreign policy. As I mentioned, I believe that we're going through a particularly innovative and interesting period. Of course, we have a wider range of tools and of possibilities at our disposal, given the fact that our house is more in order than it was in previous decades. A U.S. diplomat that I admire very much, the Assistant Secretary for the Americas, Ambassador Tom Shannon, was saying a few days ago that it's difficult to play an important role internationally, regionally, globally, if you are a divided, polarized nation internally, or if you're a nation that is grappling with very serious social and economic problems. So the fact that Brazil is in a comparatively improved situation has opened new avenues for cooperation internationally, and I think that we are not wasting the opportunity. First of all, in trying to establish closer links with our neighborhood and looking at South America as a geographic, political, and unity as a zone for economic and trade cooperation, first of all, infrastructure creation, but also as a zone of peace. If one looks around at all of the South American countries, and Brazil borders on 10 of them, we have to add Ecuador and Chile, the two that we don't border on. They all have democratically elected governments. They're all trying to look at autonomous ways of dealing with their own economic situation at home, and with strong emphasis on social policy. And although there are tensions between a few of them, I think it compares relatively favorably with other parts of the world in the sense that these tensions have been resolved consistently through dialogue, through diplomatic effort, through new mechanisms that are being created. I can give an example that happened only a year ago when there was a situation of stress between Ecuador and Colombia. Colombia having invaded the airspace of Ecuador to fight some FARC guerrillas. Well, this led to a break in diplomatic relations between the two countries, but it didn't lead to war. It didn't lead to violence on any scale, any significant scale. And on the contrary, there were efforts in the Rio Group and then subsequently at the Organization of American States to bring the situation to a dialogue, and we hope that soon they will be reestablishing diplomatic relations. Another example is the situation in Bolivia, where you have a government that is the first, you have the first indigenous president in Bolivia in their history, although the majority of Bolivians are of indigenous origin. And this has produced some internal difficulty with some of the provincial governments who have resisted the reforms that are being implemented by the central government to a point where you almost had a rupture around a year ago. Again, a new mechanism, namely the South American Defense Council, met to look at the Bolivian situation, and it created a formula for dialogue between the central government and the provincial governors in Bolivia. Hopefully that will lead to a more predictable form of interaction between two sides of a society that is still quite deeply divided. Looking beyond South America, Brazil has established a forum with India and South Africa, which has been also quite interesting. The idea here being that the three largest multi-ethnic democracies in South America, Africa, and South Asia should start cooperating more closely so that the three regions can start also establishing closer ties. And this has proved a very positive experience. It has created closer ties at the highest political level, but also a series of subgroups that deal with trade, with investment, with scientific and technological cooperation, defense cooperation, and opening up many new interesting avenues for cooperation. Just today, as I speak to you, there's a summit taking place in Doha in Qatar, where South American leaders and Middle Eastern leaders, leaders from the Arab world, are meeting at the second South American Arab World Summit. This has also been an initiative that was actually the idea of President Lula himself. President Lula being from São Paulo state, where you have the largest number of Lebanese and Syrian descendants outside of Lebanon and Syria, and having grown up surrounded by people of Lebanese and Arab descent, he felt that we should do more to reach out to countries that are often associated with a negative agenda in today's international environment, and try to establish closer trade, investment, and cooperation links. I could give you several more examples, but I think maybe I'll stop around here and invite you to raise some questions. And expressing, as a final word, again, my confidence that in terms of the cooperation between Brazil and the United States, we are enhancing our ties in practically every area, whether it's trade and economy, whether it's political dialogue, also on energy and on climate change, on human rights, on fighting racial discrimination. We have just established a plan of action to look at that and exchange experience and how we can better integrate our own societies and reduce discrimination and racial tension. And in fact, a new avenue also that we have been exploring with the United States is how to work together to improve the lives of people in third countries and other areas, in Africa especially, in the Caribbean and Central America. One country where we have been working together quite successfully has been Haiti. Haiti, a country right near Florida here in Northern America and the Caribbean, that has been subject to chronic instability and serious setbacks to its development efforts. The poorest country in the Americas today under a United Nations mandate where Brazil has the command of the peacekeeping operation with 1,200 troops, and where Brazil and the U.S. are trying to look at ways where we can contribute to Haiti's stability, first of all, but hopefully also improvements in the lives of Haitians through economic and social opportunity. So thank you very much for your attention.
The ambassadors agreed to accept some questions. We have 2 wireless mics. Please raise your hand and then tell us your name and what you're studying as well.
Well, let's go to the second row because you are from Brazil, so I'll have you BYU shirt.
Excellent, Patriota.
Are you from Hawaii?
No.
Oh,
My name is Oscar Martinez, and I'm from Mexico City. The question, well, I have 2 questions for you. Sorry for my accent. I will do my best. Okay. President Lula, last week, he stated that the economic mess that is going in the world right now, he blames the economic mess to the Americans. He stated we should not pay any money for the fault that the whites did with the economic. So that's my first question. And my second question to you is that you said that the Mexico is 80% dependent on exports to the United States, and Brazil is just 16%. What is the in your experience, how bad it's being dependent of so much of the United States?
Well, maybe I'll try to answer those questions. I'll start by saying that President Lula met with President Obama about 2 weeks ago at the Oval Office. They had what President Obama described as a marvelous meeting of minds, so I think they agreed on many issues, and it was quite interesting to see them interact, and in a way that although President Lula had very good relations with George W. Bush, but he interacted in ways that were not possible with the previous president, especially when it came to economic policy. I think there was indeed a greater convergence. And although it is true that President Lula has said that this is a crisis that has started in the developed world, that it's started in the United States, and I don't think there's any disputing that. It's something that the Americans recognize themselves, and around the world there's a recognition of this. But at the same time, President Lula has also said to President Obama and to others that we're all in the same boat. And when you're in a big boat and there's a leak, everybody has to work together to improve the conditions. So I know that when he goes to London for the G20 meeting in 2 or 3 days, he will go in a spirit of enhancing cooperation with the other actors that will be present there, and trying to look at common platforms to improve a situation that is problematic for all of us. And one way in which we would very much like to rally support around the world to move ahead and to create great opportunities, especially for the developing world, is through a successful conclusion of the Doha round of trade negotiations, because we know that in the 1930s, one of the aspects of a reaction to the Great Depression that only exacerbated the situation at that time was the fact that countries turned very much inwards and turned protectionist rather than looking at trade as an opportunity for bringing their countries out of a dire situation. It's true that this is easier said than done, than in times of growing unemployment, bankruptcies. We've seen today General Motors perhaps will have to go bankrupt in this country, and many companies, many businesses having to face extreme situations. It's not easy to keep your borders open and to keep the goods flowing. But in the final analysis, going protectionist is not a recipe that will create more jobs, that will create more opportunities. So this is one of the platforms where we know we will have many supporters. In fact, today, Governor Huntsman himself, your governor here in Utah, expressed his own belief, having been a deputy USTR himself under President Reagan, that trade could, that if one rallies enough support around the trade agenda, this will be a positive thing. When I spoke about Brazil's exposure to the U.S. market and Mexico's, well, you know, as many have said before me, and I think Napoleon was one of them, you have to do the diplomacy of your geography. And for obvious reasons, the U.S. is a much more obvious geographic reasons, a much more important partner for Mexico than it is for Brazil. You share a very large border, and there are obvious complementarities between the two economies. So I don't imply any criticism over the fact that Mexico has such a strong trade relationship with the United States. In fact, I think it makes a lot of sense for Mexico. But it also does create added difficulties for Mexico at this moment when the U.S. market is, well, going through a downturn. So I suppose what I wanted to illustrate through that example is that Brazil, of course, being further away from the United States, being closer to Africa, closer to Europe in some respects, and also having deliberately undertaken an effort to diversify its trading partners, is not only through its merit, because part of it may be merit, but part of it is just circumstance, geographic and other and historical, is today comparatively shielded from the downturn in the world economy. And in addition to the effort that it has made to incorporate larger segments of its own population to the economic domestic mainstream, this has proven to be a plus at a time of economic strife. Yes.
My name is Nathan Wirtz, and I'm an international relations major. I just returned from spending 2 years in Bahia 3 months ago. And one of the issues that I saw there very clearly, I believe it's one of the most obvious regions where social inequality is the greatest, is in the northeast. But I was just wondering what on two different fronts, like politically at home, what is Brazil planning on doing in the next few years to minimize that gap in equality? And also, how can the United States help diplomatically with the issue of inequality in Brazil?
Well, the answer to your question is relatively simple, because I don't think the majority of Brazilians would have elected Lula to be president if they didn't feel that they had to tackle the inequality issue very head-on. And the current government has placed that at the top of its agenda. So, you know, whether it's the Bolsa Familia, the family stipend project that has been helping the lower-income families to improve their situation by handing out a small subsidy of sorts for their survival, on the condition that the families keep children in school and keep them in day with their vaccines and other obligations. This has been a tremendous success, to the point where the World Bank says this is the most successful income redistribution project anywhere in the world, and there are many other countries trying to replicate it. Guatemala has looked at it, other countries in Africa, etc. And this is one of the reasons, in addition to, well, let's say the general economic improvement of the situation in Brazil, inflation is also has a very negative impact on income distribution. So when you decrease inflation, you're also helping the lower classes. All of these efforts has allowed for extreme poverty to be cut by half within 6-7 years in Brazil, and for 20 million people to migrate from a social class defined by those who earn from 2 to 5 minimum wages into a middle class bracket. So when you ask me what can be done to reduce inequality, well, it's being done. It's being done, and inequality has never been reduced at the pace that it is being reduced today in Brazil. Possibly more could be done and will continue to be done, but the results are quite impressive. And if you allow me to say this, I think that the U.S. has an inequality problem of its own to deal with in some respects, in addition, well, to any assistance, of course, provided it's done with respect for the internal efforts and the national policies, especially when they're working, can be welcome. But there's certainly a serious situation of inequality in the United States that deserves attention. It often strikes me in Washington, D.C., where I live, how different the sections where the wealthier white population live is from the majority black population in Washington, where you see rates of HIV/AIDS today that are comparable to those in Rwanda. And I was told this by a doctor friend of mine who has been working in Africa and working around the world to combat HIV/AIDS. So when I say this, I think I'm really trying to point to the idea that Brazil and the U.S. can be better partners if we look at each other's challenges and struggles and aspirations in a way where we will try to exchange experience and not where one country will try to tell the other what to do or will come with ready-made recipes. Maybe over here.
Just this past week, it was announced that Brazil will be helping train a peacekeeping force in Mozambique. What role does Brazil play in development for former Lusophone countries, especially those in Africa, and how can the U.S. and other nations learn from Brazil's experience in working in development, especially in Africa?
I'm not sure what you're referring to in Mozambique. Mozambique
Okay.
doesn't need a peacekeeping force.
I'm sorry. It's Brazil is helping to train a Mozambican peacekeeping force that will participate with the African Union.
Oh, I see.
To
To
be able
train
to-
Mozambican
Yes.
forces. Oh,
Sorry.
I see. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't even know about it myself. It's very welcome news. Brazil has a long history of participation in peacekeeping operations under United Nations mandates. We were part of some of the first efforts in Suez back in the 50s, and then during some of the civil wars in Africa, in Angola, Mozambique, in fact, when they were under civil war, we also participated, but never on the scale that we're participating today in Haiti. In Haiti, we really assumed, I think, a more thorough engagement to try to stabilize what is the only item from the Americas in the agenda of the Security Council of the United Nations. So we've been sending around 1,300 troops, and they rotate every 6 months. So you can see that the Brazilian troops are acquiring quite a bit of experience through this initiative. And the troop commander has been a Brazilian from the outset. This is also a little bit unusual because under the UN practice, they try to rotate the troop commander between the nationalities of the different troop contributing countries. And in Haiti, as in many other United Nations peacekeeping operations, there are at least 10 countries present there, predominantly Latin American countries, but also Jordan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, several others. The fact that they've requested the Brazilian troop commander to stay on, I think, is a recognition that these troops have been quite skillful and successful in bringing stability to Haiti. Now, one of the reasons this is possible, and this is an interesting lesson for peacekeeping in general, and something that we may, in fact, in the future share with others and see how we can best derive the full benefits from this experience, is that the Brazilian troops, they mingle with the population in a way that other troops don't necessarily do. So Haitians are, for example, big soccer enthusiasts, and you have among the Brazilian troops in Port-au-Prince many young soldiers who are good at soccer. So when they're not wearing their uniform, they'll play soccer with some of the kids on the streets. And this is not only helpful to create a friendly atmosphere, but it also ends up being very useful in terms of gathering intelligence on what is going to happen. There was a point where there were certain gang leaders in Haiti who were creating great instability and havoc along some of the slums in Port-au-Prince. And I was told by a UN representative himself, the special representative of the Secretary General, that the comparative advantage of the Brazilian troops, so to speak, was the fact that since they mingled so much with the population, they often could have advanced knowledge of what one gang was going to plan doing next day, and thus kind of preempt these disruptful actions. So I'm not sure if this is what you were asking me, but I believe that these experiences have indeed proven to be very useful for Brazil. We haven't had any wars in Brazil since the mid to late 19th century. So we are a very peaceful nation, one that lives in peace with all its neighbors. But there's a side to this, and I have to be careful how I say it because I don't want to sound that I'm in favor of Brazil becoming more militaristic. But I do believe that it's useful for Brazil to acquire military experience through peacekeeping, that this is something that has a positive dividend for our military and for our society. And the fact that we are having some success in Africa and places like Haiti, I think positions ourselves well to maybe train other countries and work in tandem with more developed or less developed countries in trying to keep peace around the world. Okay. Well, my colleague here in front wanted to ask a question, so maybe this is, yeah.
In a recent visit of Prime Minister Gordon Brown to Brazil, he talked about the importance of Brazil having a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. How will that help Brazil to be more of a world leader in that position?
Well, that's a good question because it points to the fact that some of the structures that we work under today don't seem to be very well adapted to the current international scenario. And the Security Council was really created after World War II. It was subsequently enlarged in the early 60s to include a few more non-permanent members. But the 5 permanent members have been the same since 1945, namely United States, United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China. Well, at the beginning it used to be Taiwan, and then after 73, the People's Republic of China. So there's increasing recognition in the United Nations and worldwide that this is not a sustainable situation, that there are other actors, that for the Council to retain its authority and to perform the role that is expected of it, to keep peace and to promote stability internationally, it has to be more representative. Just as internally in a country, the country will not be very representative if 2 or 3 states, let's take the United States, if only the East and West Coasts deliberate in Washington about the future of the country. Obviously, other parts of the country will not feel that this is a legitimate way to proceed. And I think the same applies internationally. It's no longer acceptable for the Security Council to have 5 permanent members that do not include a country from Latin America and do not include a country from Africa in particular. We are also in favor of India becoming a permanent member, and Germany and Japan have expressed their own aspirations, and we think there's logic to that. So we will continue defending this, not as an end in itself or something that will boost Brazil's leadership. I think Brazil's leadership will be mostly one that will, either be recognized or not through its own example, the example it sets in terms of dealing with its own internal challenges, in terms of showing a capacity to coexist with its neighbors in peace and harmony, and in terms of its capacity to bring to other parts of the world also a message of dialogue and tolerance and understanding through negotiation rather than through violence or other confrontational means. But certainly we are very attentive to whether it's the Security Council or the G8 or other mechanisms for international cooperation. We do believe that they are outdated, that they require modernization. And, given the global interests, and this is a nice way to end, actually, the conference today, because we did speak of bilateral, regional, and global, but given Brazil's global agenda today, Brazil feels as if it does have a contribution to make, whether it's on the peace and security front or in the economic front, on the trade front, to try to enhance cooperation worldwide. So thank you so much.